Story 1. The Death of Elisa Lam. There is a building in downtown Los Angeles that has spent nearly a century collecting the dead, not through accident, not through bad luck, but as if something inside those walls actively called to darkness, and darkness answered every single time. The Cecil Hotel opened its doors in 1924. It was built to be grand, elegant, a place for the ambitious, the wealthy, the well-traveled. But the neighborhood changed around it. The money moved on, and the Cecil was left behind on the edge of Skid Row, surrounded by poverty and desperation, slowly becoming something no one had intended it to be. By the time the Great Depression arrived, the Cecil had already recorded its first suicide. A man named Percy Cook shot himself inside his room after a falling out with his wife. That was 1927. It would not be the last. Over the decades that followed, people jumped from the windows. People were found dead in their rooms. A woman leapt from the 9th floor and landed on a pedestrian walking below. Both of them died. An elderly woman known to the locals as Pigeon Goldie, who spent her days feeding birds in the square nearby, was found in her room, stabbed to death. No one was ever charged. No one was ever caught. By the 1980s, the Cecil had descended into a place that police were reluctant to enter. Drug dealers operated openly in the hallways. Overdosed residents would lie in the corridors for days before anyone called for help. No one wanted to be the person who contacted authorities. It was in this environment, in this building, soaked in decades of violence and neglect, that one of America's most feared serial killers decided to make his home. His name was Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He lived on the 14th floor of the Cecil while he carried out a string of murders across Los Angeles that terrorized an entire city. He would return to the hotel after his killings, discard his bloody clothing in the dumpsters at the back, and walk through the lobby as if nothing had happened. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. Because at the Cecil in the 1980s, that was simply how things were. Then, in 1991, another killer arrived. An Austrian journalist named Jack Unterweger checked into the Cecil while covering a story about crime in Los Angeles. He secured ride-alongs with the Lapped. He accompanied detectives through the red light district. He was charming, professional, trusted, and while he was doing all of this, he was also killing. 3 women were strangled during the weeks he spent inside the Cecil. When investigators connected his crimes to a series of murders back in Austria, Unterweger fled. He was eventually caught, convicted of 11 murders, and on the night he was sentenced to life in prison, he took his own life in his cell, using the exact same method he had used on all of his victims. 2 serial killers, 1 hotel, decades of suicides, murders, and deaths that no official record could ever fully explain. This is the building that Elisa Lam walked into on January 26, 2013. She had no idea what had happened inside those walls. She had no idea what was about to happen to her. Elisa Lam was 21 years old. She was a student at the University of British Columbia. in Vancouver, Canada. She was the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong. She loved books. She loved exploring cities she had never seen before. She kept a blog where she wrote about fashion, photography, and the quiet details of her daily life. And in the private spaces of those blog posts, she also wrote honestly about her struggle with mental illness, about relapses, about feeling directionless, about the weight of simply existing on days when existing felt like too much. In January of 2013, she decided to travel, a solo trip up the California coast. She booked the cheapest available accommodation in downtown Los Angeles, the Cecil Hotel. She checked in on January 26th. She called her parents that evening, as she always did. She told them she had arrived. She was fine. Everything was fine. For the first 2 days of her stay, Elisa explored the city. She visited bookstores. She attended a live taping of a television show. She was doing exactly what a young traveler in Los Angeles was supposed to do. But inside the hotel, something was already going wrong. Elisa had been placed in a shared room on the 5th floor. Within 2 days, the guests sharing her room had complained to hotel management. They described her behavior as odd, unsettling. The hotel moved her to a private room. This was 3 days into her stay. It was also the last day that any hotel employee reported seeing her alive. Her parents called every day, as they always did. She answered. She spoke to them. She gave no indication that anything was wrong. On January 31st, Elisa Lam was scheduled to check out of the Cecil Hotel and continue her journey north to Santa Cruz. She never came back to the front desk. She never returned her key. Her parents called that evening. There was no answer. They called again. Nothing. They contacted the police. The lab arrived and searched what they legally could. They went through her room. They found her wallet, her ID, her laptop. Everything she needed to exist in the world was still sitting in that room. Elisa Lam had gone somewhere, and she had left behind every single thing that would have helped her come back. For days, investigators had almost nothing to work with. Then, on February 13th, the lab released security camera footage from one of the hotel's elevators. Captured on the night Elisa was last seen, the footage was uploaded online, and within hours, it had spread to every corner of the internet, because what it showed had no easy explanation. The recording is approximately 2.5 minutes long. Elisa enters the elevator wearing a red hoodie. She presses buttons, many buttons, all of them. Then she steps out of the elevator into the hallway and looks around the corner, carefully, as if she is checking whether someone is there. She steps back inside. She presses herself into the corner of the elevator. She looks at the ceiling. Then she steps back out into the hallway, and she begins moving her hands, slowly, in patterns that no one has ever been able to describe with complete accuracy. Not gesturing, not signing, something else. Something that looks almost like a conversation with someone who is not there. The elevator doors, which should have closed automatically long before this point, remain wide open throughout, as if waiting, as if something is holding them. Elisa walks out of frame. The doors finally close. That is the last confirmed footage of Elisa Lam alive. Millions of people watched that video. Investigators studied it in detail. Mental health professionals offered theories. Paranormal researchers offered theories of their own, and everyone who watched it was left with the same feeling, that something in that footage is deeply, fundamentally wrong in a way that is very difficult to explain. For 19 days after Elisa Lam disappeared, the guests of the Cecil Hotel drank, bathed in, and brushed their teeth with water from the rooftop storage tanks. During that time, some guests began to notice things. The water pressure was low. The water ran dark from the taps. It had a taste. Strange, sweet, wrong. One guest described a quality she could not identify. She and her husband drank it for a week. They assumed it was simply how things were at this particular hotel. On February 19th, a maintenance worker climbed to the roof to investigate the low water pressure. There were 4 large storage cisterns on the rooftop. Each one fed the water supply for the entire building. He checked the first, the second, the third. On the 4th cistern, he noticed something. The hatch was open. He looked inside, and he found Elisa Lam. She was floating in the water, naked. Her clothes were in the tank beside her. Her personal belongings were scattered on the roof nearby. There were no visible signs of physical trauma. The coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning. The official report listed her bipolar disorder as a significant contributing factor. Case closed. Accidental. Except the rooftop of the Cecil Hotel was not accessible to guests. There was one door leading to the roof. It was locked. It had an alarm that activated the moment it was opened. There were 3 fire escapes on the exterior of the building, all difficult to access, all clearly visible from the street. For Elisa to have reached that rooftop, she would have needed to pass through a locked, alarmed door without triggering a response, or climb a fire escape without being seen. Once on the roof, she would have needed to climb a 10-foot ladder on the side of a water tank, then lift a heavy metal hatch cover, then lower herself inside, then close the hatch behind her, alone, in the dark, in the middle of the night. The coroner said this was accidental. No one has ever fully explained how any of those steps could have happened the way the official account requires them to have happened. Elisa's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Cecil Hotel. It was dismissed in 2015. The case was officially over, and yet the questions remain. How did she get to the roof undetected? How did she lift that hatch alone? Why were her clothes folded inside the tank with her? Why did the elevator doors not close? What was she looking at in that empty hallway? What were those hand movements? Who or what was she communicating with in those final moments? None of it has ever been answered. Not by the police, not by the coroner, not by anyone. Elisa Lam was 21 years old. She was somebody's daughter. She deserved answers. Her family deserved answers. More than a decade later, those answers have never come. The Cecil Hotel keeps its secrets, the way it always has, the way it probably always will. Story 2. The Villisca Axe. Murder house in the small town of Villisca, Iowa. There is a house that has been soaked in blood for over 100 years. It sits on a quiet street. It looks ordinary. White painted wood, a modest porch. The kind of house you pass without looking twice. But on the night of June 9th, 1912, something entered that house that changed it forever. The Moore family was well liked in Villisca. Josiah Moore was a successful businessman. His wife Sarah was known throughout the community. They had 4 children together. Herman was 11, Catherine was 10, Arthur was 7, and the youngest, Paul, was only 5 years old. On the evening of June 9th, the entire family attended a Children's Day service at their local church. It was a pleasant Sunday evening. Neighbors saw them walking home together after the service. 2 young sisters, Ina and Lena Stillinger, had been invited to spend the night. Ina was 8 years old. Lena was 11. They were friends of the Moore children. It was an ordinary sleepover on an ordinary summer night in a small town where nothing bad was supposed to happen. The family returned home around 9:30. In the evening, the children went to bed. The parents went to bed. The 2 visiting girls settled into the guest room downstairs. The house went quiet, and somewhere in the darkness outside, someone was already waiting. Investigators later determined that the killer had entered the house before the family returned from church. They had hidden in the attic or in a cupboard, completely still, completely silent, waiting for every light to go out, waiting for every sound to stop, waiting for 8 people to fall completely, deeply, helplessly asleep. When the house was finally still, the killer moved. They took the family's own axe from where it had been left near the door, and they went to work. They began in the master bedroom where Josiah and Sarah Moore slept. The medical examiner later determined that each victim had been struck between 20 and 30 times with the blunt end of the axe. The ceiling above the beds bore gouge marks from the force of the upswing. Josiah received the most blows of anyone in that house. He had been struck so many times that his face was unrecognizable. When it was done in the master bedroom, the killer moved upstairs to where the children slept. Herman, Catherine, Arthur, Paul. All of them were killed in the same way, in their beds, without ever having the chance to wake or run or cry out. Then the killer moved back downstairs to the guest room, where Ina and Lena Stillinger slept. 8 people entered that house on the evening of June 9th, 1912. None of them walked out. The bodies were discovered the next morning by a neighbor named Mary Peckham, who noticed the house was unusually quiet and that the animals outside had not been fed. She knocked on the door. No one answered was Vit. She looked through the window. What she saw made her run. Word spread through Villisca within hours. Hundreds of people descended on the house before investigators had even arrived. They walked through the rooms. They touched the walls. They moved through the crime scene with no understanding of what they were destroying. By the time official investigators arrived, the evidence had been contaminated beyond recovery. Footprints had been walked over. Objects had been moved. The chain of evidence had been broken before it had even been established. In 1912, rural Iowa had no forensic laboratories, no DNA analysis, no standardized procedures for preserving a crime scene. And even if perfect evidence had survived that morning crowd, there was no technology available to analyze it. The investigation produced several suspects over the years that followed. A traveling minister named Reverend George Kelly had been in Villisca the night of the murders to lead the very Children's Day service the Moore family attended. He left town before dawn the next morning, hours before the bodies were discovered. He was known to be eccentric. He had a history of mental illness. He had been accused of inappropriate behavior toward young women and girls. Years later, in 1917, he confessed to the murders in court, claiming that God had whispered in his ear to commit them. His confession was dismissed as the product of mental illness. He was tried twice. Both times, he walked free. Another suspect was a serial killer named William Mansfield, who had committed eerily similar axe murders in neighboring states. Entire families killed in their beds, the same method, the same silence, the same disappearance into the night afterward. An eyewitness claimed to have seen Mansfield boarding a train just 20 minutes outside of Villisca. On the morning the bodies were found, it was never enough to charge him. There was also a local businessman named Frank Jones, who had harbored a deep personal hatred for Josiah Moore over a business dispute. Many of the townspeople believed it was him. His career was destroyed by this suspicion. His reputation never recovered. But there was never enough evidence. There was never enough of anything. The investigation dragged on for nearly a decade. Grand juries were convened. Private detectives were hired. Political careers rose and fell on the back of the case, and when it was all over, no one had been convicted. No one had been held accountable. The killer had walked into that house, moved through 8 people with an axe, and vanished so completely that over 100 years of investigations has never found them. The house still stands today. In the 1990s, it was purchased and carefully restored to its exact condition from the night of the murders. The furniture is the same. The layout is the same. The rooms where those children slept are the same. It costs over $400 to spend a night inside. People come from all over the country to do exactly that. Ghost hunters, paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, most of them report something. A figure moving in the dark, the faint sound of children crying from somewhere inside the walls, a feeling of being watched that does not go away no matter which room you stand in. But in November of 2014, one visitor's experience crossed a line that no one expected. A man arrived for what was supposed to be a routine paranormal visit with friends. At approximately 12:45 in the morning, his companions found him stabbed in the chest. The wound was self-inflicted. He was rushed to hospital and he survived. But he has never spoken publicly about what happened to him inside that house. He has never explained what he felt, or what he saw, or what drove him to do what he did. The only detail that quietly stood out to those who noticed it was the time. 12:45 in the morning, the same hour over a century earlier, when the axe murders in that house began. The Villisca Axe Murder House remains open today. Tours run regularly. Overnight stays are still available. The beds are still made. The rooms are still waiting. And somewhere in an evidence box that no one has opened in decades, the case file for the murder of 8 people sits unresolved. The killer was never found. The killer was never punished. And whatever is left of them, whether memory or presence or something that defies any rational description, may still be in that house, watching the door, waiting for the next light to go out. Story 3. The Enfield Poltergeist. There is a house at 284 Green Street in Enfield, North London, that looks exactly like every other house on the street. 2 stories, brick exterior, a small front garden. The kind of unremarkable council house that was built by the thousands in post-war Britain to house ordinary families living ordinary lives. In 1977, the Hodgson family lived there. Peggy Hodgson was a single mother.
Her children on her own.
Margaret was 13. Janet was 11. Johnny was 10. And Billy was 7. They were not a family with any particular history of strange beliefs or dramatic claims. They were not people seeking attention. Peggy was a quiet, pragmatic woman working hard to keep her family together with very little money and no one to help her. The house had been their home since 1967. Nothing unusual had ever happened there. No previous tenants had reported anything. No history of tragedy was attached to the address. It was simply a house until the night of August 30th, 1977. That evening, Janet and her brother Johnny heard something, a shuffling sound, coming from the direction of a large wooden chest of drawers against the wall of their bedroom. Janet assumed it was the cat. She called out. The sound stopped. She went back to sleep. The next night, it happened again. But this time, the chest of drawers began to move, slowly, across the floor, toward the door. Janet screamed. Peggy came running, and as she stood in the doorway of her children's room, the chest of drawers moved again. By itself, she pushed it back against the wall. It moved again. 4 times she pushed it back. 4 times it moved away from the wall on its own. Peggy Hodgson called the police. Constable Carolyn Heaps arrived at 284 Green Street in the early hours of the morning. She walked through the house. She looked in every room. She found nothing that explained what the family was describing. Then, as she stood in the living room, she watched a large, heavy armchair slide 4 feet across the floor, on its own, without anyone touching it. She filed an official report. In it, she stated that she had personally witnessed a piece of furniture move without any visible cause. That was the beginning. Over the 18 months that followed, the events inside that house escalated in ways that attracted the attention of investigators, journalists, police officers, and researchers from around the world. The Society for Psychical Research sent two of the experienced investigators, Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, arrived at 284 Green Street and set up a long-term investigation. They came with recording equipment, with cameras, with the intention of finding a rational explanation for what the family was reporting. What they found over the months that followed has never been fully explained. Objects flew through rooms with no one throwing them. Furniture moved without being touched. Strange pools of water appeared on the floor with no source that could be identified. Cold spots formed in specific areas of the house and refused to dissipate regardless of the temperature outside. Over 30 witnesses documented what they experienced inside that building. Police officers, trained investigators, journalists from national as newspapers, neighbors, photographers, all of them reported the same things. All of them left with the same inability to explain what they had witnessed. But the most disturbing element of the entire case was not the moving furniture. It was not the flying objects. It was not even the photographs that showed Janet suspended in the air above her bed at angles that should not have been physically possible. It was the voice. It began during one of the investigation sessions. Janet was sitting in the room with the investigators when she began to speak, not in her own voice, in a voice that was deep, rasping, the voice of an elderly man. It gave a name. It said it was Bill Wilkins. It said it had lived in that house. It said it had died in that house. It said it had died sitting in a chair in the corner of the downstairs room. It described as hemorrhage. It said it had fallen from the chair. It said it could not see properly at the end. Then it was gone. Investigators looked into the name. They searched local records and they found him. A man named Bill Wilkins had lived at 284 Green Street before the Hodgson family moved in. He had died there from a hemorrhage in the downstairs room. A previous neighbor confirmed it. The investigators had not known this when the voice gave the information. The Hodgson family had not known it. Janet had not known it. But the voice had known. Ed and Lorraine Warren, the American paranormal investigators, visited the house in January of 1978. Lorraine Warren claimed to have detected what she described as a demonic presence attached specifically to Janet. She recommended an exorcism. The Catholic Church sent a representative to examine the case. Doctors evaluated Janet thoroughly. Psychologists spent hours with her. No medical or psychological explanation was ever found for the voice. No explanation was found for the recordings. No explanation was ever offered for what over 30 credible witnesses documented inside that house over the course of 18 months. There was a period during the investigation when Janet admitted that she and her sister had faked some of the events, bending spoons, moving things themselves when they thought no one was watching. She said later that they did it because they were children who were frightened and exhausted, and sometimes they wanted the investigators to leave. But she was also very clear about something else. She said that most of it they did not fake. Most of it was real. And she said that the voice was never her. Not once, not ever. The investigations eventually ended. The family moved away from the house years later. Peggy Hodgson remained at 284 Green Street for the rest of her life. She died there in 2003. Her daughter Janet is still alive today. She rarely speaks publicly about what happened. She has given occasional interviews over the years, always reluctantly, always with the same careful composure of someone who has spent decades watching people decide they know better than she does about her own experience. When she does speak, she says the same thing consistently. It was real. She was a child. She did not ask for it. She did not understand it. She still does not fully understand it. But it was real. The case of the Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the most extensively investigated and thoroughly documented alleged paranormal events in modern history. Over 30 witnesses, police reports, hundreds of hours of audio recording, photographs that have never been convincingly debunked, and at the center of all of it, a voice on a tape recording that knows the name of a dead man, knows how he died, knows where he fell, in a house where no one still living had any way of knowing any of those things. The house at 284 Green Street still stands. Other families have lived there since. Whether they have experienced anything inside those walls, they have chosen not to say, but the recordings still exist. The police reports still exist. The sworn affidavits still exist. And the voice of Bill Wilkins, captured on magnetic tape in a council house in North London in 1977, is still out there, still waiting to be explained by someone who can do it without simply looking away.